everyone, it's Inés and welcome back to Draw Curiosity. Did you know that, on average, humans have 5 million hairs on our bodies? Only about 100,000 of those are found on our heads, but in reality we are coated all over in a tremendous dusting of hairs. However, there are creatures out there who are even hairier than us by surface areas, such as bees. And maybe that's why they're so cute. We all know the furrier something is, the cuter it is. Honeybees are estimated to have around 3 million hairs. That's about the same as a squirrel, but of course on a much smaller body. And there are many reasons for being hairy beyond ranking higher on the cuteness list of this doting entomologist. So let's find out what they are. One, to be warm. Let's get the obvious ones out of the way first. We all know that hair is good at keeping us warm. I mean, there was a reason I had the super long hair in the UK and then went short when I went to Spain and to the tropics. And bees actually need to be at a minimum body temperature of 35 degrees Celsius in order to be able to fly, even though they can fly in weather conditions ranging between 13 and 38 degrees Celsius. So that means that just like us, they need to be able to generate and conserve their own body heat to stay at a steady 35 Celsius in order to be able to take flight. Beneath 10 degrees Celsius, bees actually go on strike. Is it because they're not getting enough honey and working too many flowers? Actually, it's because they enter a state known as chill coma, and they become immobile. In fact, back when I was researching bees during my PhD, if we wanted to safely tag something onto them, what we would do is we would chill them in the fridge for a few minutes and then would keep them over ice whilst tagging them. And then we would put them back at room temperature to allow them to warm up again so they could go back to doing their own business and take flight once more. And quite often when you see stranded bees at the end of the day, it's generally because they have insufficient energy to build up the heat required to sustain flight. Now, under freezing conditions, bees that are all alone will die within an hour. In the hive, cold bees will huddle together. Doing so lets their short plumose thoracic hairs interface together, and it helps increase their internal temperature of the hive, as there is a greater volume to surface area ratio of warm bees, and this can allow them to survive up to 9 hours in otherwise deadly temperatures, and generally that will be long enough for the sun to rise and warm up the environment again. Just to demonstrate how incredible bees and their fuzzy selves are at conserving heat even at extreme cold temperatures, there are records of bees maintaining a 37 degrees Celsius hive core even at temperatures of minus 80 degrees Celsius. For the record, that is much more resistant than the vast majority of birds and mammals who also need to keep a high body temperature in order to survive. In fact, to quantify how helpful hairs are in conserving heat, an experiment using hairless mutant bees found that at low temperatures of 2 degrees Celsius, the bald bees would actually expend 20% more energy and 5 times as much oxygen just to stay as warm as their hairier counterparts, which could easily mean the difference between surviving a flight out of the hive or not. And the difference in energy expenditure between hairy and hairless bees was not significantly different at higher temperatures. But given that honeybees do actually overwinter and they generally populate areas that have temperate and highly varying weather throughout the year, it actually does pay off and makes bees a lot more adaptable to have all of these short hairs that keep them warm. 2. To be sensitive. Bees, as well as many other insects, also use their hairs to detect the world around them, and these are known as mechanosensory hairs. Cockroaches are probably the most renowned amongst entomologists for their mechanosensory hairs because their cerci, which are the 2 sensing appendages at the rear end of their abdomen, are known to be extremely sensitive. A cockroach can react to a puff of air on its butt in under 1/100th of a second, and this is over 20 times faster than a human's fastest possible reaction time to a stimuli. I used to study locusts, which also have flow-sensing hairs on their head and all over their bodies. As shown in this old video that I made, How to Build Cyborg Beetles, blowing on their faces when their legs are not attached to anything will make them reflexively beat their wings as they are receiving cues for flight. Bees and bumblebees are no different, and they also receive sensory information through their hairs, and they do so in 2 main ways. Firstly, they detect particle velocity. That basically means they detect the way the air moves around them, both when they are flying and when they are stationary. The faster the air moves, the more the hair moves too when coming in contact with the air, and that then gets translated into useful information for the bee. They can also pick up resonant vibrations between 100 and 500 Hz, and that would generally correspond to the wing beat frequency of most potential predators and other disturbances out there. Secondly, bees are actually electrically charged, and they can also detect electric fields. Not humans, but plenty of animals are actually capable of electroreception, though most of them are aquatic. Think rays, sharks, dolphins, amphibians, platypuses, and that's because water is a much more conducive medium for electricity. I also recently learned that echidnas, which is a land mammal, is also capable of electroreception. In their case, their electrosensing hairs are in their snout, which they stick into humid soil, and they use that to detect their prey. So they are still taking advantage of the extra conductivity of the water. Now, the electroreception that bees are capable of is a lot more rudimentary because it takes place in the air, and the electrical fields are a lot weaker, but it does provide additional information about their surroundings, enhancing their mechanosensitive hair information. And finally, as I did mention just now, bees are also electrically charged, and this also helps with the pollen attaching to their hairs in the first place. And this leads us to 3. Be pollinated. The other thing that bees are renowned for, flying out to drink buckets of nectar and collect bounties of pollen in their leg pollen baskets. And how does hair come into this? Well, the way bees collect pollen is both more haphazard and technical than one may expect. After a bee enters the flower to find and drink nectar, electrostatic forces make the pollen particles cling to their body hair in the process, and that completely coats their exterior. Then they need to redistribute all of that pollen from their entire surface area to either offer them into the void or into a designated pollen basket. This process is called grooming, and it's quite frankly a very nifty biomechanical feat. Firstly, I need you to understand the frenetic speed at which bee grooming happens. Here are some bees rubbing their faces at full speed to remove tiny particles of pollen and other debris from their bodies before entering the hive. Researchers at Georgia Tech actually studied in thorough detail how bees groom themselves, and they are extremely efficient at it. Bees often groom whilst they're flying, quite the multitaskers if you ask me, and they can generally clean and groom their entire body from top to bottom, front to back in 10 to 20 leg swipes. Considering that each leg swipe takes slightly over a tenth of a second, the leg swiping portion of grooming is over pretty quickly, but it does take them several seconds for the bees to completely rub the pollen off from their legs. Part of the secret to bees being so good at redirecting their pollen is down to the spacing of their hairs. Whereas our body hair is both sparse and uniformly spaced for the most part, bees have regional differences. The hairs on their legs are a lot more tightly spaced than on the rest of their body, which makes it a lot easier for the pollen to transfer from their body hairs to their basitarsal combs. Researchers estimated that each leg, which has around 1,100 hairs, can remove on the order of 430 particles of pollen per swipe from their body. Their success in removing pollen is also related to the hair spacing being optimized to the size of pollen particles. Whilst their basitarsal combs are very good at removing pollen, bees that were dunked in an experiment by inquisitive Georgia Tech researchers in cornstarch were not able to groom themselves successfully. This is because cornstarch has a particle size a third of that of pollen, and as such the bees' cleaning motions are close to fruitless, as it is essentially the equivalent of combing fine hair with a wide-tooth comb. And of course, for rigour, they also performed an experiment where they used a smooth, hairless leg to remove pollen. And of course, I don't need to tell you that hairy legs are obviously 4 times more efficient at removing pollen as completely smooth legs. Finally, the other thing is that bees have hair on their eyes. Think eyelashes, but slightly more horrifying. Instead of surrounding their compound eyes, they have many short hairs emerging around each ommatidia, which is each individual eye in the compound eye. The spacing of these hairs is similar to that of a grain of pollen, which means they successfully shield the eye from pollen depositing on them, as the pollen then essentially remains suspended above the hairs and can then be easily removed afterwards. And brushing their eyes is literally one of the fastest motions a bee can do, as they can very rapidly scrape these off as needed and still be able to see. 4. To be loaded. Aside from grooming excess particles from themselves, they also agglutinate pollen together and create pollen baskets to transport them back to the hive. They do this by mixing the pollen with nectar to form a more viscous pellet, which they can then glue onto their hind legs for transportation. They begin by wetting their forelegs with their protruding tongue, and then using them to comb off all the pollen that has gathered over their body, pushing it towards their hind legs, where it is then compacted and appended to the hairs on their hind legs. The properties of these pellets actually allow them to remain attached until the bee later reaches the hive, where they will then slowly scrape them off into a hive cell. The specific anatomy in which bees store pollen actually varies quite a bit across different families. Honeybees, bumblebees, stingless bees, and orchid bees all have a very specialized structure for storing pollen, which is called the curbicula or the pollen basket. It is essentially a cavity on their legs surrounded by hairs, and it actually helps them collect the pollen. Apis species specifically, such as the honeybee, have a single hair that functions as a pin to hold the center of their pollen pellet. All other bees have a structure called the scopa, which is a less specialized but equivalent in function essentially. It is a dense and larger mass of branched hairs onto which they press the gathered pollen, and the grains remain packed in place due to the narrow spacing of the hairs. 5. Might you be a mite? I might be. Finally, not only is the hair designed to keep bees clean from pollen, but also clean from mites. Varroa destructor mites are one of the peskiest and smartest parasites. They parasitize bees by inserting themselves between their abdominal plates, biting into their integument, and feeding off their hemolymph, weakening the bee. It would be the equivalent of a plate chomping onto your back and feeding for the day. Varroa mites spread really easy through colonies, and they can evade pesticides by sealing themselves in with the larvae in the capped hives, so they are definitely a threat to bees. Nonetheless, the bees' dense hair and combs on their legs does give them a good first line of protection against the mites, because firstly, the presence of hair will actually slow down the mites and make it a little bit harder for them to reach the surface of their cuticle, and their hairy combs on their legs also aids the bees in dislodging the parasites a little bit more easily. Bees don't just groom themselves, they also actually groom each other. And this means they can brush out the mites from other bees and then bite the mites' legs off with their mandibles. This makes it impossible for the mite to then reattach themselves to a new honeybee. Some bee subspecies are actually known to be slightly more resistant to mite parasitization than others, and it is actually thought to be related to the development of more aggressive grooming behaviors using their combs as opposed to the presence of hair themselves. So those bees that groom more can actually help placate the mite population. It has also been noted that bees tend to prioritize dancing bees for grooming, and it is thought that there may actually be a specific bee dance that signals to the others that they wish to be groomed, which might also aid in concerting a collaborative effort to remove the mites. So there you go, 5 broad reasons why bees are so hairy. I can hardly believe that hair could be put to so many uses. And of course, I can think of a good 6th reason, which is to be cute and be featured in a Draw Curiosity video. Of course, I am kidding here on the last one, but before I go, I really hope you enjoyed this video. It is, in my humble opinion, quite possibly one of the best videos I have ever made. I'm really proud of it, and hopefully you think so too. And if your appetite is whetted for more videos like this one, there is already a new one on nebula. It is all about the science behind a life hack that I wish more people knew about specifically, and it's also about the nitty-gritty of the fluid dynamics that go into it. Because as a biomechanics doctorate, I, of course, had to explore the intersection between different disciplines. And as you know, I'm a nebula creator, and I've been uploading here following the Nebula First model, where each time I upload a video to YouTube, there is always a guaranteed new unseen video from me available on Nebula. Nebula is a platform for indie creators who actually support the content creation efforts of creators like me. So if you want ad-free, and in the case of my videos, the earliest access of hours of high-quality content, including my next video and other creators that you probably also love and enjoy, such as Wendover Productions, Lindsay Ellis, Philosophy Tube, Real Engineering, feel free to sign up using my Nebula code go.nebula.tv/drawcuriosity. It will give you 40% off your subscription, and a significant portion of the proceeds will go directly towards supporting my content creation. Additionally, a Nebula subscription also grants access to exclusive content such as Nebula Originals. Recently, I attended the premiere to Identities, which is one of Nebula's latest originals, and it was a stupendous production. It was exploring gender and expression, honestly the perfect release for Pride Month, and it starred some of my favorite people. And to everyone who signed up already using the link on my previous video, thank you so much, and I really hope you thoroughly enjoy the next one. As ever, I am extremely grateful to you and for all of you for watching all the way to the end. To all all of my Patreons and Twitch subs for supporting the work I do. And of course, there's going to be a Twitch stream following this video, so keep your eyes open for that. So I'll see you there. And as always, thank you so much for watching me, and I'll see you in the next one.